Hey friends, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be reviewing, comparing these two grinders. This is the Fellow Opus, Fellow's brand new conical burr grinder that claims it can do both filter coffee and espresso for $195. And this competitor and other brand new grinder to the market, which is the Baratza ENCORE ESP, ESP standing for espresso. Again, another budget grinder at $199 that claims it can do filter and espresso. And what I want to do today is compare it to some competition that also can do espresso and filter coffee, uses a conical burr similar to these, to compare to see which is the best budget espresso grinder. I'm excited. Now, if you could do me a huge favor, it's gonna take you 2 seconds, but down below, I want you to write, hey, woo! Right silver button. Thank you guys, 100K. Thanks for YouTube for sending this over. Huge milestone. It's been years in the making, 100,000 subscribers. Okay, where should we put this? Also, while you're writing silver button, hit that like button down below for the YouTube algorithm. Okay, let's dive into this. Let's start with the Fellow Opus. Now, I've had this grinder for a while. Now, the only reason I haven't posted to date is I've been under NDA. I'd rather not talk about that, but what I do want to talk about is this grinder. So now the Fellow Opus is interesting to me. I'm a fan of Fellow, especially recently. They've really put a lot of effort into ensuring their products don't just look good, but they produce good quality results. And this one uses a conical burr set. The internals of this machine are very different than previous grinders. Now, what makes the Opus very different than the other grinders is this one is an all-purpose grinder. That means you can do both filter coffee and espresso. Now, if you're not sure why you wouldn't be able to with the Ode, well, espresso often requires a much finer grind, and because of that, the motor needs to be torquier, it needs to be more powerful, and when using certain styles of burrs, like flat burrs, it can be harder to go to finer settings without needing a very powerful motor to make that happen. Using a conical burr is a great alternative as long as you can ensure that you've got the adjustments, because espresso, when you're grinding so fine, you need micro adjustments, very fine adjustments to be able to make that happen. Let me show you what's going on. With this grinder, you put your beans up here on the top. This is the hopper. Now, this hopper is removable. You can pop it off just with a little spin. And inside here, you can see a blue ring and then the burr set inside. Now this, talk about that. Now this burr set pops out with a twist, and it inside is a 40mm conical burr. This is a very, very traditional style of size in conical burrs, and we've seen it in dozens and dozens of grinders, including some on this table. Now, what makes this different is that this is $195, the cheapest grinder on this table, mind you, from one of the biggest companies, and this one claims that it can do, again, espresso. Now, to do that, it allows you to adjust the settings with 41 clicks of adjustment. On the front here, you can see it goes from 1 all the way to 11, and inside that there is 1, 2, 3, 4 clicks in between. And within those clicks, you can then change the adjustment even further with micro adjustments. Now, this is very confusing. I'm going to keep it very simple. Now, what's interesting is each one of these does a vertical burr movement of 50 microns. Now, 50 microns is, it's great for filter coffee. It's going to be able to do filter coffee excellent. Now, what's going to be interesting is espresso. This obviously claims it can do espresso, and 50 microns of vertical movement in the burr, it's just not going to have the precision that you would want for espresso. You want to be able to really dial in, and sometimes one adjustment can go from like a 20-second shot up to like a 30-second shot, and you maybe want like a 25-second shot. That's just an example. Don't quote me on that. And so with that, Fellow, thought of this, and so they designed something on the inside. Now, I've got a lot of thoughts on this, which I'm going to share, but here's how it works. Basically, you push this blue collar down, and then you twist the adjustment. Now, with these, each one of these clicks is 33 microns of vertical burr movement. If you're going to use this, it completely throws off the outer burr numbers. So if you're really confused and you're like, I just need a coffee grinder for espresso, stick around because I have some thoughts on what you might want to consider. Otherwise, this can do espresso, you can do it fine. It's not hard to use. All right, all you have to do is like, hey, if I'm noticing my shot's a little too fast or if it's a little too slow, open this up and you can press this blue thing down and then you can adjust it and just have a micro adjustment. But let's talk about my thoughts on this. Now, really, it's confusing, and I think a lot of people who are new to coffee won't get it. This is also not something for an enthusiast. I think really this is a great alternative to having a million different clicks on the front of the grinder. That being said, it would have been really nice if Fellow would have been able to do this stepless. So that's gonna be my critique here. It's not bad, and it's definitely not a reason you shouldn't buy this grinder unless you think of that as really confusing even as I speak about it. You're adjusting the clicks, okay? And if you wanna get a little more precise, you can pop this hopper off and you can adjust it a little further. That's how I would explain it. But for filter coffee, you won't need to touch that. This is a grinder, very clearly, in a budget category that is able to do espresso. And if you want to get very precise with espresso, you can. it's just a little more confusing. Let's move on. If we move down here, this is obviously where the burr sits. So let's pop that burr out real quick. So what this means is it's got a center comb burr, which you can see here. And on the outside has got this ring. And as this spins, it draws beans through into the gaps below the burr and it grinds out the coffee as you would adjust the grind size. Very typical. As the coffee is ground, it goes through just a straight chute design right down into this grind cup. There's no divots or there's no pathways where coffee can get stuck, though retention does happen on this grinder, which we'll talk about. This burr set spins at a 350 RPM. Obviously this looks very fellow. It's got the matte blacks. Eventually they'll come out with like different colors, I think. Now, a couple features here missing from the Ode. It's auto off feature. Instead of an auto off feature, you have a timed button. If you press it once, it's 30 seconds, twice 60 seconds, I think 3 times 90 seconds, and if you hold it, it's up to 2 minutes. But again, this is kind of where they're cutting costs to bring the cost down for the grinder. I'm not going to complain about that. With this, you have a dosing cup. Now, unlike the Ode, this one is plastic. It's got this lid that you can use for espresso. It's got this little spot here where you can grind right into this little chute, and then you can take this off, or you can just use the whole dosing cup and dose into a portafilter like that. Give it a couple taps, and all your coffee will sit in your portafilter. You can then WDT, or you can tamp it, whatever you normally do for espresso, and brew your coffee. If you pop this out, you've then got this inner cup, but it's got this nice texture so coffee grounds won't stick. Also, like the Ode, this is magnetic, so if you press it in, it finds its place on the Opus. It's not quite as nice as the Odes. The Odes is like really nice to use and really strong. This one is clearly, a cheaper grinder. As you can see here, it does get scratched up, and I've only had this for, a few months maybe. Now, this coffee grinder, in my experience, does have a little bit of retention, and I cannot leave that unaddressed. I don't think it's a deal breaker, but I definitely think it's something you should be aware of. What retention means, if you're not aware, is that this sometimes keeps coffee inside the burr chamber. You might need to tap the lid on top of the Ode to push things out, or give it a little tap. I think it would be really nice if somebody 3D printed a Opus bellows. I'm sure it'll be out there, and if there is one that exists, I'll try to link it down below. Once there's a bellows, I think this will be even better for retention. But at this current point, it does hold a little bit of retention. A lot of it actually being underneath the burr. It's been about 1/3 to 1/2 of a gram of coffee in my experience. As you use this grinder, I would just recommend that you clean it often. Also, the Opus has the anti-static technology that's on the Ode. It uses an ionizer to basically zap all the static as it's being ground, and basically reduces all the static, so you don't really need to use a ton of water. That being said, I have found that the retention is a little bit better when using little spritz of water on my coffee beans, if you're into that sort of thing. And if you are, the results can be a little bit better. But if you're not, you don't really need that out of the box. You still will need to tap a little bit here and there. It isn't a perfect system, but again, it's a budget grinder and should be considered as such. Now we're gonna brew some coffee on this and these other grinders, so hold for thoughts on what I think of the coffee, but let's quickly talk about some other design features. On the back here, you've got a nice texture with the fellow logo. It's got the traditional power cord, nothing crazy there. Only a 2-prong, not a 3-prong, at least here in North America. It's plastic, there's not a lot of metals. This burr too, it's not made in-house. It's actually made by the same people who made the Ode 2 Gen 2 burr. There's been some tweaks to a burr that already existed. So this is not a burr on any other grinder right now. I think that's pretty interesting, and I know that Nick and the team at Fellow have been working really hard to ensure that this creates good results. Moving on to the Baratza ENCORE ESP, and again, ESP standing for Espresso. And I think this really kills the ENCORE in every single way. Now, Baratza's not gonna let me saying that, but I really do think there's no reason you should buy the ENCORE after you see this grinder and what it's capable of. So let's talk about that. Now, like its name, it does do espresso, and in the first 20 clicks of its adjustment, these are all made for espresso. You can see that they have a different indication of where espresso will be ground and where filter can be ground. And it's very similar to the ENCORE in its aesthetics. Obviously, everything is the same. It's got some rounded front here with an updated Baratza logo versus saying ENCORE. Now, let's talk about the ESP. Other than the adjustment system, what makes it different? Well, internally, they've actually changed some components. The internals of this grinder are now metal. Now, my ENCORE seems to be all plastic, and you can see the original ENCORE versus the new ESP. They've actually updated and upgraded from their M3 burr to their M2 burr that is found in the Virtuoso. Now, this is a really nice burr, and a lot of people have modded their original ENCORE to have this M2. So not only do we have metal components, a more sturdy chassis, but we also have an upgraded burr as well. Then you add the ability to adjust for espresso, The motor is the exact same from what I can tell. It's loud, it's quirky, it's Baratza to a core. But again, you either love it or hate it. And underneath here, you've got a new little chamber here. I don't know, this is nice. I actually really like this, and I would use this regardless of filter or espresso, to be quite honest. On the top of this dosing cup, you've also got a rubber gasket, which allows you to dose into a 58 millimeter portafilter. Or if you've got like a Breville or something that uses a 54 millimeter portafilter, listen, because this is really important. You can dose into that with a 54 millimeter opening here. Interesting, I actually didn't realize this. Upon inspection, it actually seems the Opus has a 54 millimeter inner circle too. So both of these should be able to dose for like a Breville espresso machine if you use a 54 millimeter portafilter. If you don't know what size your portafilter is and you have a Breville machine, there's a good chance it's 54 millimeters. Hey, this is a very interesting grinder in terms of its build. I think this one actually feels a little more sturdy than the Opus in a lot of ways, but I'm gonna dock some points here on the hopper. I do believe you have to buy an additional single dosing hopper, which doesn't even look that great if you want to get that on the ENCORE. And again, I would say in terms of cleaning, the Opus is much easier to clean. I can just pop this hopper off real quick, pop open the burr in a matter of seconds, where the ENCORE, I've got to change my grind setting first of all, so if you don't keep track of where you're at, you're gonna lose that. I've got to go all the way to 0, then pull this out. And once I've pulled this out, then I have to unscrew this. If you're somebody who gets nervous about taking things apart like that, be aware, it's nothing crazy, but anyways, the Opus is much easier to clean. Now, we talked about the Opus's adjustment and how you can dial in your coffee, but the ENCORE's is very good. And at this point, I think is very underrated from what I've seen online. And I think you need to listen up to this, because this, for a lot of people, is going to be incredible. Baratza has engineered a whole new adjustment system. 21 to 40 adjustments are very similar to their previous grinder. Now, I just confirmed with Baratza, and this is their espresso range is gonna change about 19 microns of adjustment. So that's pretty interesting and very important, because that's plenty for espresso, especially if you're buying a budget grinder. Now this one over here, like I said earlier, it's much bigger adjustments, but if you count in their micro settings and kind of play around with the math on this, you can get in more precise, but not by much. So really, this one's easier to use in terms of dialing in for espresso. This one though, for filter, I think it's got more options, right? So you've got 41 clicks on the outside of here. Many of them can be used for filter. So if you're not gonna wanna play with the micro settings, you don't plan to do a ton of espresso, this might be a better adjustment system to play around with. But if you plan to do a lot of espresso, and this is gonna be like a daily driver for espresso, out of the box, I think this is easier to use. The way that they've threaded the mechanism as you twist this, it gets much coarser, much faster as you go past that. And so these ones up here, you can still get real coarse. You can get to those French press settings or whatever you would need, real coarse. And that is really impressive that they've engineered something really cool at this price range. I think it's cool. I would love to see this technology on a ton of other grinders. Why not, right? You have one spin, this to this. You can do espresso to coarse, you know? There's so many other grinders like this one. Like this one, you gotta twist like 2-3 rotations. You gotta reference your 0 point. That's nice. So we've been talking a lot about the coffee grinders, but let's actually brew some coffee. Let's taste it to see which one I think is best. So I've got a ton of coffee grinders on this table, and I'm gonna explain which grinders these are in just a second. But what we're gonna do is brew a coffee, and then blindly, I'm going to taste them to see which one is my favorite and least favorite. And then I'm gonna share with you which those are. We're gonna expose which is my favorite. Now this is subjective, but I'm gonna try and take this as objectively as I can and not put my preferences into this, which I just think overall is a better cup of coffee, what most people would enjoy the most. So while I'm brewing this coffee, I'm gonna tell you about Standart magazine, the sponsor of today's video. And Standart is a specialty coffee magazine, and honestly one of my favorite resources, especially in a physical print, for the world of specialty coffee, the community of specialty coffee, and just learning more about brewing coffee at home. Right now I'm reading an amazing article called The Turbo Shot, the bullet train of espresso. And in this article, it's just an absolutely easy way to understand what the Turbo Shot is, its history, and what some other pros in the industry think about it. And so I think it's a fascinating read, and I think it's articles like this that just keep me coming back to Standart. If it's learning about certain origins, or learning about certain producers, or learning about different methods within coffee, or certain coffee gear items, Standart has you covered with so many different topics, including giving you coffee in every single issue. Now, if you haven't tried out Standart before, you need to try it out. You can try it out by using the link down below and checking them out. And you get an issue of Standart every single quarter. Beautiful articles, beautiful paper, every single article is fully color. Go check them out. Again, they're a sponsor to this channel. They really have been a huge supporter and enable me to make videos like these. Without Standart, some of these videos just aren't possible. So just go ahead, use that link down below. Check out Standart, can't recommend enough. And thank you Standart so much for sponsoring this video. Okay, I'm back. What might have been seconds to you was about 45 minutes of me dialing in each of these grinders and brewing a shot of espresso on each. Now, this video is all about espresso, and that's the intention of this video. So if you want to know more about filter coffee, stick around a little later in this video. I'm not going to do a blind cupping like these, but I have done a whole nother video talking about filter coffee for budget grinders, which you can find, again, linked down below. So let's talk about these. I have 6 shots of espresso. I don't know which one is which. Natasha's come in here and swap these around. I'm just going to stir these up with my WDT only because I don't have a spoon. It's just not a pleasant feeling. Okay, if you dislike slurping or drinking noises, you might want to skip ahead about 10 seconds. Interesting. So let's quickly talk about this. I think I'm just going to tell you which one's my favorite in order, but these are good, and I think most people would enjoy the results here. My favorite out of these is going to be, I think, this. I like that one. And that one. Now, I think this one's my favorite, followed closely by this one. This one has some really nice sweetness. Obviously, these are all conicals, so they have very conical style profiles that are gonna often tend to lean towards complexity in a cup. That one's really nice. And this one's good too. Not quite as clean as this cup, but some good sweetness there. Just a well-blended cup. It tasted really good. I would enjoy that most days. So I'm gonna put this one in first place, this one in second. I'm gonna probably put this one here in third, and this one here in fourth, and then fifth. So first, second, third, fourth, fifth. And honestly, they were pretty close. Some of them more close than others. I think these 3 were very similar. This one actually was a little different than these 2. I think these 2 were the most similar, but the reason why this one was better than this one, I just felt like this one just had a nicer texture, a nicer mouthfeel. And this one here still had good mouthfeel, but it was just not quite as nice as this one. This one was definitely my favorite. It actually had a good mouthfeel, good texture, but it also had some great sweetness and some good transparency of the cup. I just felt like I understood what was happening with that coffee. Where this one over here, this one was incredibly muddy. It felt very blended. A lot of astringency in this one over here, and this one over here was kind of the opposite. I did find a little bit of astringency in this one here. It wasn't unpleasant. It wasn't as clean as these, but I did find that this was enjoyable, but I wouldn't enjoy these as much daily as these ones over here. Let's reveal what it is. So in 5th place, we've got the Turin SD40. That would make a lot of sense. So let's talk about these grinders as I go through here. Now the SD40 is a grinder we've talked about on this channel before, but real quick, it is a conical burr grinder. I won't go over all the specs, but this grinder has been known to make some more muddy cups than its competitors, in my opinion at least. I find for espresso, it's just not great. For filter coffee, it's not quite the same story. It's a little bit better than even some more expensive conical burr grinders that favor more complexity than this one. Actually, that's okay. But for espresso, I don't enjoy its cup profiles. That's historically true, and it shows up here today. Though overall, this is a pretty nice, beefy little grinder. Though I think in espresso, I think there's better options in this budget. Number 4 is the Opus. Interesting. Okay, I have to say, for me, the Opus is a good grinder. At $195, for me, it's so exciting that grinders are able to do espresso at under $200 US. I think this is just, to me, at one point, the ENCORE was a good deal for filter coffee, and then it was like, if you want to get an espresso, plan to at least spend $1,000, $1,500, which is just a lot of money for a lot of people. And then here we are with a $200 grinder that can do espresso. Okay, the profile is 4th place here. I will say the Opus, for me, is more of a filter coffee first grinder with the ability to do espresso. And I know fellow might not love to hear that, but hear me out. I think the ability, I mean, for me, espresso really is only between the 1 to 2, maybe 2.5, maybe up to 3. But like for me, I was brewing naturals that were fresh off roast, which is often this, you know, you go for a slightly coarser grind on a coffee like that. And I was brewing it closer to like a 1.5, 2. Obviously we can get it in the micro adjustments here, but most of its range is filter coffee. Like most of its range is going to be in the center here, maybe closer to the smaller numbers. And then if you want to get real coarse, you can here. Yeah, like I think this is completely able to do espresso, and I have to give a fellow props here. Like, come on, this is incredible for $195. But I do have to say that, I mean, we've got some good competitors here. For me, the cup profile is clean. It's very nice for $195. Listen, I'm going down a rabbit hole here. If you're watching this and this is your first coffee video, or you're just wanting to know about the Opus, yes, it can do espresso, it can do filter coffee. You will be happy for the most part. Number 3. The Varia VS3. Interesting. Now the Varia VS3 is interesting. This is a $300 grinder, so more expensive than some of the other grinders, but its build quality is substantially better than most of these too. So it's all metal, it's compact, it's got a really nice matte black design, and overall it definitely feels a lot more premium. So you are paying for that. Obviously the cup results show it, that it is nicer than some of these other options. And again, this is subjective, so some people might prefer this more than any, some people might not. Now, the thing I've said with the Varia VS3 in the past, and again, you can watch this video link down below, is that it has a very low RPM. It spins the burr at a very low speed. Now, when it comes to espresso, obviously it creates good cups, but I have seen some issues on Reddit and even my own Discord, which you can join for free down below, whose Varia VS3s have had issues. Now, I'm sure Varia is great and their customer service is great. I honestly can't speak to that. All right, number 2 is the Baratza ESP. All right, I find that this is interesting that the Baratza actually beat out the VS3 in this comparison. You know, it could have been the way I brewed it, it could have been the coffee, it could have been many different variables. But this is definitely a good grinder for espresso, and I love how easy it is to dial in for the most part. And it came in second place for cup profile. So that leaves the Lagom Mini for first place, which is this grinder right here. Now again, it is kind of unfair that I'm allowing the Mini in this comparison because it is so much more, you know, almost double the price as some of these grinders. But I thought it would be interesting to have a grinder that's under $500 in this comparison that is a conical burr, because I do think this grinder is a gold standard for grinders in this market, but it isn't really in the same class as something like the Opus or the ESP. It is more money, but it does show. This was my favorite cup out of all of them. The build quality is fantastic. This one really didn't win. If I took the Mini away, that would leave these 4. And for that, then the ENCORE ESP actually came in first, the VS3 second, the Opus third, and then last is the SD40. Okay, so we have talked about these grinders. I have tasted these grinders. What's left to talk about? Well, let's talk about workflow and then my final thoughts. Now, each one of these grinders is quirky in their own way. No grinder is perfect by any means. The Opus definitely has a little bit of a retention, and you want to tap on top of this as you grind with it. But overall, this is a really nice grinder for the price. I think Fellow has done some really cool stuff here, and to use it daily is a joy. This dose cup is really nice to use, especially with this inner espresso basket. It works really well for espresso, and if you're going to use this for filter coffee, it's just a great grinder to use, honestly, especially for a budget conical grinder. I think this will be a gold standard for many years to come for its aesthetics, its build quality, and its price. I think you'll see this in a lot of homes in the near future. Maybe not necessarily enthusiasts, although enthusiasts, you shouldn't necessarily bat an eye at this because of the quirky adjustments, especially for filter coffee. I think you'll be very, very happy. Speaking of filter coffee, real quick on these two, I put these side by side. I actually really enjoy both of them. They're clean, they're sweet, and again, keeping in mind that they're a budget conical burr electric grinder, I've been impressed with both of them. This does have the M2 burr, and the Virtuoso has been known to do very good filter coffee for a long time. The Opus right now is a fantastic buy, and I don't think you should hold off waiting for a new Opus because that's just not going to happen anytime soon. Don't. You know, you'll be waiting for the version 3 or version 4 if you have that mindset. It's just a good grinder, and I think for the price, you should be happy with either one of these. Which one would I choose out of these two? Well, let's compare it to these two first and we'll finish off with that. Now we've got 3 other grinders here if we're not including the old ENCORE, and each of these are very interesting. The SD40 I've talked about being a fantastic filter coffee grinder that has a lot of power, but at this point now at $260, I would probably take these two over the ST40. I actually prefer the cups that these two produce over the ST40 for both espresso and filter as well, especially the ENCORE I think just makes really delicious cups. The VS3 is a fantastic little grinder for filter coffee, and if I was to choose my favorite filter coffee grinder, it'd probably be the Mini and then the VS3, and the VS3 is probably the best value in terms of what you get out of the box. So you're wondering, Kyle, just get to it, which grinder should I buy? Let me break this down for you. Now we're talking about these two grinders today, in the Opus and the ESP. Here's what I would say. If you're interested in the Opus, I would say you should be interested in the Opus for its filter coffee capabilities. You should not just buy this for being an espresso only grinder. My opinion, and yours might be different, but I just think the adjustments are not perfect for espresso. If you're looking for like an all-purpose grinder, I think this is great. I definitely think this is a good grinder. If you're doing occasional espresso, maybe like, a few shots a week, but if you're doing a daily espresso, I would actually take the ENCORE over the Opus. The ENCORE is nicer to dial in for espresso. It just has a nicer workflow for me for espresso, and I just feel like it's been more thought out and it's a little more polished in those regards. But when it comes to filter, I definitely love the adjustment range here on the Opus. I think it's going to be a better overall and daily filter coffee grinder. This dosing cup is much better than this one here. It's got magnets and it's got timed features here. It's much quieter, but the ENCORE ESP is very impressive if you're interested in filter and espresso. Both of these are great options, and really it's going to be a hard decision. But my verdict here is I would buy this if you're just interested in espresso with the occasional filter, and this one if you're interested in filter with the occasional espresso. That's kind of where I'm at with these two. They're both fantastic and they're basically the same price. But I need to give some disclaimer here. Both of these two were gifted to me by the manufacturer, and normally I buy my items through my Patreon and give those items back to patrons for funding. But these were, pre-production units, and so I couldn't purchase them. They shipped them out to me, and here we are. If you enjoyed this video, do me a huge favor. Please consider hitting that like button down below. If you want to win some of the gear that I give away, including coffee, then join the Patreon, which is linked down below as well. Join the free home barista Discord if you haven't yet already. Love every single one of you guys. See you in the next video. Peace.